in front of me, and I need to do a selfie, don't I?
Yeah, of course you can.
To
Do
get
a
it.
selfie.
Yes, both. This is really technically difficult, isn't it?
Well, it's been quite simple to do from our end. Once you know what you're doing, I guess, but this is the first time that we're using the system. So thank you so much.
Oh, let's just push the boundaries today,
Yes.
Anne-Marie. It's momentous. Yes.
Exactly. All right, let's press record and get the show on the road, as they say.
You're listening to another ambitious entrepreneurnetwork.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
This is Women in Leadership Podcast, featuring success insights from women around the globe. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Women in Leadership Podcast. This is episode 117, brought to you by Podcasting with Purpose, helping you to stand out, be heard, and become that influential voice in your industry with a podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross, the podcasting queen. Now, my guest today says, never underestimate the power of a community that works together for a common purpose. And joining me on today's show is Carrie Anderson. Carrie is the founder of the Operation Next Gen program. She works with rural towns across Australia, encouraging them to look at existing landscapes with fresh eyes so that they can understand the importance of encouraging business. Now, she is committed to sharing positive stories of rural businesses and communities, and she's also the author of Entrepreneurship, It's Everybody's Business, and she brings an authentic business voice to national and international forums. Now, on today's show, Kerry's going to share, if it has to be, it's up to me. If we want change, it starts with us. So true. She's also going to talk about never stop learning in the global and ever-changing environment, as well as those paying attention and being prepared to be agile will always survive. Welcome to the show, Kerry.
Good morning, Anne-Marie and listeners.
Never stop learning in an ever-changing global environment. Well, we're doing that with technology today. So thank you so much for playing that. So let's talk about, how did you get into the business that you're now in? Was it something that you've had an interest in for some time? Tell us the journey.
Well, I think growing up in a small business family in a rural town, you're very aware of your community. You're very aware of what's going around you. And when I got involved in the community leadership space, I had the privilege of travelling around rural Victorian towns. And you get to see some really thriving towns and all the hard work that's going on. And then you see others that are struggling. And you think, why? Why is this happening? And as I'm getting towards the end of my business career, I don't have a retail shop anymore that I'm tied to. I've got the ability to travel around a bit more. I thought this is an important space. You do need small business people getting out there and encouraging towns to understand the importance of business. I feel like there's a whole generation missing out on why small business is important to rural towns. So it's a bit of a passion, and I'm lucky enough to be in that space that I can take some time away from an office or a business and get out and talk to people about this important subject.
Yes. And you only have to hear, and you see quite often on the news, where businesses do close down from small towns, and they're very slowly but surely the younger families leave, and people start to leave that town. And the people are the town, aren't they? The community really needs one another to be able to survive as well as thrive. So I love how you've said it has to be, if it has to be, it's up to me. If we want change, it starts with us. What are some of the key factors? Because I know the challenges that smaller towns are faced with, the rural community towns, the things that are applicable to them to change that can be very much applicable to other situations in our business and our career as well. What are some of the gaps that you see? What would you love as far as the message that you're sharing for people to be aware of, so that they can start to implement, different strategies to attract more people, obviously business, but more people to the towns too? What are some of the principles you're teaching?
Well, it starts with taking action yourself, taking control of your own destiny. It's not about waiting for government to step in and fix things, just sit back and have a big whinge fest. It's always been up to communities. And if you look back to the original community leaders, they were the ones that shaped the towns and decided here is a good place to, found a community. They made it happen, not the government. So there's very much that concept. There's also the importance of everyone taking responsibility. It's not just down to a few. Everyone has the ability to have positive change and take leadership action. And it's about also having that constant looking at things changing. That complacency is an issue with towns and with businesses. The minute you think that perhaps we are in a great place, we're happy, we're safe, things change, and we're in a global market now. And technology is creating new ways of doing businesses. We need to constantly be looking at our landscapes with fresh eyes and seeing how, sometimes it just needs a little touch up, sometimes it needs an entire repainting. And most of all, if we've got all our eggs in the one basket, we're very vulnerable. It might be a booming industry, going very well for us, but I find this with agricultural towns, with mining towns. All the small businesses are focused on that one industry. And even manufacturing, if we're all manufacturing, if we're all too much of one thing, we are very vulnerable. And sometimes in businesses, we need to look at diversifying, looking at changing the way we operate that business, look for new markets in a global world. If we're not doing these things, we really are making ourselves vulnerable. And I guess there's a sector of people that aren't prepared to change, and that's okay. That's their choice. But don't whinge about it. Just get out of business or move away as quickly as you can. It's about working with the people that do understand we have to be agile and adaptable and constantly innovating.
Yes. I think too, with the technologies and tools that we have at our fingertips, as long as we've got internet connection, of course, we do open the world to us, and exposure and marketing and getting the message out is not as inhibited now as it was many years ago, where there was standard ways that we promote about the town and share stories and so forth. What would you say then to someone who is hesitant to change? Because some people, there's a small demographic in society that just likes things to stay that they how they were. But as you've said, we are in a global ever-changing environment. Industries that were very prevalent many years ago just don't exist, and some of the industries that we know and like now may not exist in the future too. So what would be something that you would like to share if people are struggling with change?
Well, it's important to enjoy what you're doing. And I guess if you wake up and you don't want to go to work, don't want to go and open your business, well, you really need to reassess what you want to do with life. Life is too short to spend it being unhappy. And it's really good to go out and, I guess we all get tired in our businesses. In country towns, we tend to stick with our businesses because it's allowing us to live where we want to live. So we're not like, the startup kingdom where you start up something and move on to a new challenge. We tend to establish businesses that we enjoy and allow us to live where we are. But if you're getting tired in those businesses, it's just so important to get out and expose yourself to new ideas, new people, which will help reinvigorate your thinking, perhaps help you find a new direction. Maybe that the best decision to make is to exit and allow someone else to pick up that business opportunity that you're passionate about. And I think a lot of people in rural towns get stuck in that rut, and they feel, well, we need to keep opening, but I'm not really enjoying it. Why not start thinking about, well, how can you make it that you can enjoy it? Or how can I find some new people to take on this business, this succession planning, someone with fresh ideas that can come in, and how can we make it accessible to them? It's very hard to buy into an established business, particularly if there's a lot of assets connected, but maybe you could lease the premises to some new and upcoming people. Maybe you can sell the stock as it's sold. Maybe you can mentor them and work alongside them, have a buy-in situation. So you don't have to be stuck in what you're doing, and maybe your new business direction is something fresh and new that you've always wanted to do. But, we have to step back and take responsibility. If we're not happy, well, that means probably our staff aren't happy, our customers aren't happy. Everyone needs to find their sweet spot, and that sweet spot keeps changing, as does the way we operate. So there's lots of things that we can do individually, and as a community, there's ways we can pull together too and help make things happen. Collaboratively, it's much more effective if we have these conversations.
Yes, so true. What, we're talking about business ideas. What are some of the ways that you recommend people do to think outside the box, so to speak? Because sometimes it can be very difficult to come up with new ideas and possibilities if we do have the existing models that we know have always worked, but aren't going to necessarily work into the future as well. What are some ideas that you can share? And some of these brainstorming ideas, I'm sure, are useful for other people in business as well. So are there a couple of go-to favourite ways for you that you share?
Well, there's no one way. And with the Operation NextGen program, we always say you would have new conversations with new people in new places. So if you're doing the same old and mixing with the same people and looking at the same things, how can you innovate? How can you think differently? So always look outside your industry. Start talking to people that you don't normally connect with. It's amazing how you can generate new thinking, new ideas. And yes, we might be in a rural town, 400 k's from the nearest capital city, but I'm talking to you today from rural Victoria. I could be talking, yesterday morning I was talking with someone in New York, in America, got up early to do a crossing. Just observe. I remember one piece of advice was when you get on social media in the morning, look in the trending bars. See what's happening in the outside world. You never know what's going to happen. A favourite story of how the Mcdonald's Drive-Thru originated. The founder of McDonald's was actually walking to a bank to do some banking, and he noticed some workmen at the side of the bank doing, and he thought, well, jokingly, are they breaking in? And they said, no, we're installing a night safe so the owners can drive around, not even hop out of their car, can actually deposit their money. That's how the Drive-Thru McDonald's concept came, from the banking industry. So look outside your industry, look what's happening, talk to different people. And yes, it takes time, but it stimulates thinking and some amazing partnerships, some new ideas can originate. It's very simple. Just get out there and talk to new people in new places.
Exactly. And again, as you said, for people who have very closed off minds and who aren't aware of things, the next best idea for their business, such as the example you just shared, could be a pivot in their business that takes their business to the next level, because it's something that they had not considered, and is something that is definitely embraced by their community and their customers. Talk a little bit about collaboration. The reason is because one of my colleagues, he's also a professor in university, talks about entrepreneurship, and he was saying that Australia, as a whole, in comparison to many other countries and nations, we're not as willing, if you will, to collaborate. We like to keep our ideas close by. But I know in communities you need to collaborate, because your welfare and your survival often will depend on that. But what are some insights you can share around collaboration to ensure that if you do head down the track of collaborating with someone that the relationship is a win-win and obviously doesn't fall flat. So what are some things you can share around this?
I think understanding the greater good is really important. No business is an island, and competition is great. And I remember a restaurant owner in a rural town. I was actually judging some business awards, and he had a beautiful restaurant. It was obviously very high standard, and we asked him about marketing, and he says, "Oh, we do a street marketing program." And he said, the more restaurants in this street, the better. It's no business is an island. And I remember those words very well. And even competitors can actually work collaboratively together successfully. There's a wonderful story that I published on my blog about Pentagon Feeds. And it was a group of pig growers. They were facing spiralling costs, freight costs in getting the feed, the local feed mill closed down. And obviously feed is a huge cost of their business, growing their pigs over a number of months and years. So they joined forces, 5 of them, to form Pentagon Feeds in 2010. They had a very clear guidelines. Their one point where they came together was they wanted to save money on feeding their pigs, which was a huge cost to their businesses. So it didn't matter that technically they could be regarded as competitors, but they had a point that they agreed on and they could work on. So, they put together a company plan, very clear guidelines on how they operate, and within a few years it was turning over $20 million for them. So what was a cost-saving exercise has actually become a profit-making exercise, and they've used the latest technology. They're now supplying feed to lots of other pig growers around Victoria. So I think collaboration is just so important. Even if you consider that person one of your business, one of your competitors. So collaboratively, people have different ideas to bring to the table. They have different skills, different networks to open a door to you. Whether you're a rural town or a rural business, you'd be crazy not to consider collaborating. And it adds to your reach. It adds to the interest, and it just can have so many benefits. And I agree. We tend to be very independent here in Australia. We're very stoic. We just grit our teeth and think when times are tough, and we just keep working away and doing things the tough way. When in actual fact, if we changed our mindset, and when I travel in rural America, I find a very different, approach to entrepreneurship. They're proud of being in business. They use the word entrepreneurs with pride, whereas we tend to shrink a little bit with the tall poppy syndrome here in Australia. It's a really hard word to say. It's really hard to spell. But I have a saying: if you can't spell entrepreneur, be one and hire someone that can.
Yes, yeah. I love the way that you've said that, because there's a couple of aspects to that, I think, that I'd like to discuss a little bit more, because what you said about the tall poppy syndrome, absolutely. And, sometimes, and we talked about this earlier on, if it has to be, it's up to me. If we want change, it starts with us. So often as, individuals, there may be something that we're struggling with, or there's a gap, or we think, I'd love for this and this to happen. Like the feed example that you shared, I'm sure some person said, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful if somehow we were able to reduce the cost of our feed? And then from there, the idea started to germinate, and collaboration, partnership was then established. So sometimes it's up to me. It can be difficult, and we can come up with challenges, particularly when other people may not yet see our vision. And we start to do something different, and they poo-poo us, and they say, oh, that will never work. And being in a smaller community, that really stands out, because I think everyone knows everyone's business in smaller communities. Yeah. So what would you say to someone that does have an idea but has kept quiet because they fear the tall poppy syndrome, or they fear, judging? And even if some things don't work, well, guess what? You gave it a go. Maybe the next time you do something, you change it, and then that's the thing that will work. but we'll never know unless we give it a go. So what's some insights that you've shared? Maybe some examples that you want to bring to the interview too, because I think sometimes examples just share as great stories.
Yes, well, it is. It's reminding people that failure is good. It's part of that normal process. So I encourage those crazy ideas. I say, bring it on, bring it on, and it's really important in our schools and in our communities to talk about failure is good. It's part of the learning and moving on to greatness. And I talk about Ruslan Kogan, who I bumped into on an elevator once in Melbourne, and he was wearing this really cool T-shirt. I didn't know who he was. And as he's going up and the escalator, I'm coming down, and I turned around and I yelled out, "Where'd you get that T-shirt?" And he yelled back, "Online." And I went to the conference after lunch, and here he was, a keynote speaker, and I realised who he was. And he talked about the story about how he started in his parents' garage, but he had 10 businesses. It was the 10th business where he had success. So I talk about that in my brief brush with fame, almost, and did not. The funny thing about not understanding the online reference, but there's lots of stories like that where you can share highly successful people on the world stage. Were they successful first up? No, they weren't. And this is part of that entrepreneurial mindset. We have to test things, we have to try them to find out whether they are going to be successful. And sometimes it's a great idea, it's just the wrong time and the wrong place. It can be brought back at another time. Sometimes things are so forward thinking, people just don't get it and it doesn't take off. So it's about, you don't necessarily be the person. There's inventors that have great ideas, but it's actually the ones that have that perseverance and that vision to stick with it on the long road and actually make it a commercial success. So we've got lots of bright people out there having their ideas, and they say, "Oh, but I thought of that first." But did you make it a success? Did you stick with it? Did you investigate how we could change this, bring in partners to make it a success? So yes, it's more than just having a great idea. We need to really develop them, stick with them for the long run, be prepared to change, be prepared to bring in people to help us make it happen. And that's what we've got to get better at in Australia. Yes. But, those that stick with it have great rewards. And every time someone tells me about a crazy person with all these crazy ideas, I say, well, stick with them. One day you'll really want to know them.
Exactly. Yes. Well, I love that saying, and I hope I'm able to reiterate this in a way that people can understand. But it's like, the gentleman, and I can't even remember the name. Isn't that ridiculous? Was it Holden or Ford? Henry Ford, I think, made the car, and he said if he had have asked my customers what do they want, they would have said faster horses. And he completely, thought of motor vehicles. Now, I'm sure there would have been people back in those days thinking, what on earth are you creating? And now we would not think of not having a motor vehicle, So I think definitely we need to be aware that people will probably, because they don't see our vision. And guess what? That's okay. Don't let that stop you. And don't let the fact that, the first, the second, the third, the 10th time stop you either, because every time you're going to use that lesson, what worked, what didn't work, what can we change to make that next better, reiteration, the one that certainly will land well. And as you say, that is part of entrepreneurship. I love also the way that you said, go and see what's happening outside, and not outside of your community, but out different industries, but outside of your country, because there may be other people that are similar. Like you said, you went to the US and you saw other rural communities, because sometimes what they're doing can plant the seed that you think, wow, maybe we can do that. We can change it a little bit for our environment. And now, of course, we've got tools and technology to be able to do that. So what are some go-to tools and resources that you can recommend, or maybe that you go to, that keeps you, fresh ideas and keeps your finger on the pulse, so to speak? Do you have some go-to resources?
Well, obviously, social media is really important. Just those quick little grabs that get your attention, but then can lead you to in-depth stories. I really think the key to all of this is sharing positive stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, of how people create businesses, stimulate communities, because it's showing it's possible. So it doesn't have to be highly technical, but just the internet has opened so many opportunities and for us to share our stories and inspiration. I think we also need to think about how technology can make us smarter and more appealing in our businesses. And those little tools, apps are wonderful things. And I'm thinking of a great little business over in Birchip called TMC Enviro. And when our rural areas, where Touchwood, we're having a pretty good season over in the Mallee at the moment, but a number of years ago, they were heading into drought, and that business knew that was happening, and their primary customers were land care groups, farmers doing environmental work, the CMAs, all that industry. Now, when a Premier announces drought funding, where does that money come from? He's not got a row of trees growing new money on. He's actually going to pull it from areas that are already funded. And this business knew that their primary clients were going to have their budgets slashed. So he had to look for new markets. And to work smarter. So they introduced apps to their staff that they could log incidents on their phones if there was a near miss or an issue, or recording stuff. They became highly technical so that they could convince other clients in other industries, like the Werribee Zoo, that they could build a 4-metre high mesh fence for their impalas to keep them safe in their enclosures. So they actually started competing with city fence builders and took on a new industry just by introducing apps and technology, the way they actually did their work. So, it makes you more appealing to people saying, well, they're really switched on. They're really conscious of OH&S. They're keeping their staff informed and safe, and they've got this centralised system. So I think we have to embrace technology to see how we can work smarter and better in our lives, and think about how, I spend a lot of my time speaking. So, it's just a no-brainer. I have to think about how can I be a more effective speaker. So I have the little tools, and my kids are very impressed with me sometimes with some of the technology that I have to get someone to show me how to use. But, I use to make it more simpler and seamless and more effective in my communication. And it might be simple as a little pointer, one of those jazzy ones that does your slides, how, using Canva to make your marketing materials more stimulating. There's so much online that we can source, and we need to be, and they're coming up new all the time, how we can do this stuff.
All the time.
Yeah.
Case example, we were going to connect via Zoom. It's a piece of technology that I've used for many years. However, now I'm using StreamYard and Restream, and we are streaming to 2 Facebook pages, YouTube, and Periscope, which is on Twitter. And then eventually when LinkedIn gives me access, and there are another, I think 20 or 30 platforms, but a lot of them are gaming. So here's one interview with you across multiple platforms. We now have the ability to share our message, and I'm sure every single community has their unique stories that they can share, and capture that really well and start to share that. And then, align that to the businesses and things that can be seen to attract, attention on a global scale if we wanted to. I think now, those tools we never had available, even 5 years ago. 2 years ago, a year ago in some instances.
Exactly. Well, it's changing almost by the month. And if you connect yourself with people like Steve Samaratino and Tim Gentle and just yourself following it, we're looking at the new technologies, the new things that you're doing. And we learn from each other. I might be doing a really cool thing that people copy or pick up or ask me about, but I'm looking at what they're doing. And yes, some are just not appropriate to me, or I feel maybe they'll take more time to learn than is warranted. But sometimes you see something and think, yep, that could improve my business model, and that's what really cool businesses, like TMC Enviro and lots of others out in rural Victoria and Australia are picking up and learning, okay, I saw this through another business, I can adapt that and use that in my business. So just keep looking around you and you'll pick up things that are appropriate for you to use. And one thing at a time. I like to learn one thing at a time, learn it well, and then move on. We don't have...
Perfect. Just try it out, and the next time you use it again, you can improve. So
we learn as we go, and tell people, hey, this is new. What do you think? How can I make it better? Oh, gee, I stuffed up that. But people, but we're authentic business people, and I think even our customers, love in businesses where business owners are testing ideas. And I know Elise Brown from Fair Dinkum Dog Coats, she's out there really, really testing her market all the time with customers, and she interviews people all the time, just informally, and saying, I'm Elise from Fair Dinkum Dog Coats. I was just wondering, what do you think of this? And she was telling me the other day, at the school pickup, she tests ideas out with the mums and dads that are waiting to pick up the kids. So she said, today's question. So they give all their ideas, and they're saying, and what's tomorrow's question? So we can think about it in advance. So they understand she's learning and trying new things all the time. And, people love that they're contributing to your business journey. They become part of your family. So use them.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Love that example. Love our conversation too, Kerry. How can people connect with you, find out more about how you can support them?
Okay, well, I have an online website, obviously, carrieanderson.com.au, and I love it when people connect with my blog, because I write stories about rural communities and rural businesses, and share stories. And also, I'm always welcoming new ideas, people to interview and share their stories. So please reach out. You'll find me on Facebook, Rural Entrepreneurs, LinkedIn, you'll find me. That's a big, long name. And Twitter, my handle is @KerryWords. So I just love connecting with people across the world, to share those positive stories. And yes, we all have our down times and tough periods, but how do we overcome them? That's part of the learning. I'm here to share those journeys so that we can all learn from each other. And obviously the opportunity to work with rural towns that are ready to take control of their own destiny. Just love that. Happy to go and talk to them about how they might like to do that anytime.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to a new audience. So well done, Anne-Marie, with your podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You've been listening to Women in Leadership Podcast, brought to you by podcastingwithpurpose.com. Stand out, be heard, influence. Want to influence real change with your own podcast? Access our free podcast training, including our no-cost and low-cost tools and podcast production workflow checklist to get you started at www.podcastingwithpurpose.com/mini training. That's podcastingwithpurpose.com/mini training.